A lot of founders assume that once a Delaware company is incorporated, the hard part is over. The company exists, the documents are filed, the startup is moving. But Delaware looks at this differently, because there is a big difference between having an entity on record and having an entity that is actually in good standing. And the difference tends to show up at the worst possible moment. When you open a bank account, when an investor is doing diligence, when a partner asks for company documents, when a legal team requests proof that your company is clean, active, and properly maintained. So, this is not a technicality. It is one of the simplest signals of whether your Delaware company is being run like a real company or just treated like a formation document you filed once and forgot.
Simply saying, good standing means Delaware does not see an obvious compliance problem with your entity at the state level. Your company may still exist in the database, but that alone does not tell the full story. An entity can appear in searches and still have issues that matter for tax, filings, or legal status. That is why founders need to separate two ideas. First, the company exists. Second, the company is in proper standing with Delaware. Those are not the same thing. And if you are using a Delaware company for fundraising or cross-border operations, banking or payment infrastructure, or serious contracts, that distinction matters much more than many founders expect. The practical part is straightforward. Delaware has an official online status tool. You can request a basic status check or a status check with tax and history information. That is useful because it lets you verify where the entity stands before a bigger transaction forces you to do it under pressure. But here is the nuance founders often miss. An online status request is not the same thing as an official certificate of good standing. The online tool gives you status information. The official certificate is a separate document that may be required by banks, counterparties, or legal advisors during more formal processes. So if you are checking the company only for your own internal review, the online tool may be enough. If you are preparing for a bank, diligence process, or transaction, you may need the official certificate instead. Most founders do not think about good standing proactively. They think about it reactively, usually when something external forces the question, can you provide your company documents? Can you prove the entity is in good standing? Can we see status confirmation? Can your registered structure support this bank or investment process? And then the scramble starts, because the issue usually is not some dramatic legal disaster. More often, it is something basic: missed tax handling, filing confusion, registered agent problems, or a company that has simply not been maintained properly after incorporation. In other words, the problem is not that Delaware is mysterious. The problem is that founders often treat incorporation like a one-time event instead of an ongoing compliance relationship. The classic causes are not glamorous: franchise tax issues, annual report or filing issues, official notices that nobody monitored carefully, confusion around the registered agent, a general assumption that once the company is formed, nothing else really matters. That last one is probably the biggest trap. Delaware is founder-friendly in many ways, but it is still a system, and systems work well only when basic obligations are kept current, so the practical lesson here is simple. Good standing is usually lost through neglect, not complexity. Most founders do not get into trouble because the rules are impossible. They get into trouble because nobody was clearly responsible for keeping the company clean. This distinction deserves its own block because it looks small, but in practice, it matters a lot. A quick online status check tells you useful information about the entity's current standing. An official certificate of good standing is a formal state-issued document. That is the version third parties may ask for when they need documentary proof, rather than a founder saying, "We checked it." So if a founder says, "I already looked up the company online," that may still not solve the real request. A bank may want the certificate. A buyer may want the certificate. Counsel on the other side of a transaction may also want the certificate. And if you only discover that distinction at the last minute, a routine process suddenly turns into friction. Good standing is not only a compliance concept, it is also a trust signal. If you formed in Delaware because you wanted institutional credibility, investor familiarity, and a structure that serious counterparties understand, then maintaining the company properly is part of the package. Delaware helps companies because the ecosystem is predictable, familiar, and widely accepted. But that only works if the company itself is maintained in a way that matches that expectation. So the real point is bigger than one status check. Good standing is one of the clearest indicators that your company is not just incorporated, it is operationally credible.
So, here is the takeaway. If you have a Delaware company, do not wait until a bank investor or partner forces the question. Check the status before the pressure arrives. Understand whether you need a simple status review or an official certificate. And treat good standing as part of company hygiene, not a last-minute fix. Because one of the fastest ways to create avoidable friction is to realize too late that your Delaware entity exists, but is not in the shape you thought it was. And in the next video, we go deeper into one of the most common reasons founders create the problem for themselves: Delaware franchise tax mistakes.